In the year 985, on the north coast of Iceland, a man named Sigurdir Thorleifsson was in a bind. His farm, nestled in the Skagafjordur district, was short on timber. Good timber was life. It was longhouses, ships, tools, and warmth. But the island's birch forests were thin and dwindling. The best wood came from the sea. Driftwood, massive logs of pine and spruce washed ashore after a long journey from North America or Siberia. This ocean-sent gift was governed by law. A man had rights to the driftwood that landed on his own shoreline. Sigurdur had a problem. His neighbor, Eystein Apterdandi, had a longer stretch of coast. Eystein was claiming logs that Sigurdur believed had touched his own small beach first, before the tide pulled them further down. This was not a matter for axes and swords. It was a matter for witnesses and the law. A fragment of a lost saga known today only as the Saga of Sigurdur Slifa tells this story. The name Slifa means drool or slobber. It was not a flattering nickname. It suggests Sigurdur was not a great hero. He was just a man, the surviving piece of vellum, a single damaged leaf catalogued as AM 557 full D, doesn't describe a glorious battle. It details Sigurdur's preparations for the local assembly, the Thing. He gathered 2 freeholders to serve as his witnesses. One was his cousin, Ormur, a man known for his steady hands with a fishing net and his even steadier memory. The other was a farmer named Grimkel, who owed Sigurdur a favor from 2 winters past involving a lost sheep. The fragment describes the conversation between them. They did not speak of glory. They spoke of tides. They spoke of the way the current curled around the Havanderi headland. They recalled specific logs from past seasons. One, a great pine trunk marked with 3 distinctive notches, had been the subject of a similar, smaller dispute the year before. Grimkel remembered it clearly. He had helped haul it from the water. This is all we have. The fragment ends before the assembly. We do not know if Sigurdur won his case. We do not know if he got his timber. We only know that a man nicknamed Slobber, a farmer concerned about his wood supply, took his problem to the law. He relied on his community and their shared memory, not his sword arm. The great sagas tell of kings and earls, of voyages to new worlds and epic feuds that span generations. But forgotten fragments like this one tell another story. They speak of the day-to-day struggles, the small disputes, and the intricate social rules that held their world together. They reveal a soul concerned not just with fame, but with survival, fairness, and the precise direction of the ocean's current. Number 22, A King's Perfect Circle lasted 1 generation. Around the year 980, a man named Bjorn left his farmstead near the Limfjord in Denmark. He was a shipwright, or at least his father was. Bjorn knew wood. He knew how to read its grain, how to shape it with an adze, how to make it strong. He was not going to build a ship. He was summoned to build a fortress. King Harald Bluetooth was the one who, commanded it. The king was changing things. He was making Denmark into one kingdom with one god and one ruler. Bjorn arrived at the site. It was called Firkat. He saw hundreds of men. They were not just warriors. They were carpenters, blacksmiths, laborers. They were digging a massive circular ditch. Inside the ditch, they were raising a perfectly round rampart of earth and timber. The scale of it was unlike anything Bjorn had ever seen. A local chieftain might build a longhouse and a palisade. This was different. This was mathematics. A man with a measuring rope showed Bjorn where to work. The fortress was divided into 4 equal quadrants by 2 roads that crossed at a perfect right angle. In each quadrant, 4 longhouses were to be built. They were identical. 16 longhouses in total, all the same size, all with the same distinctive curved walls that made them look like ships resting on the land. Bjorn was put to work on the timbers for the 3rd longhouse in the northeast quadrant. He worked with a team of 10 men. The wood was oak, vast quantities of it. Forests must have been cleared for this project. The foreman was a man named Tok, a grim fellow who cared only for straight lines and tight joints. There was no room for a craftsman's personal touch. Every plank, every beam had to match the plan. It felt strange to Bjorn. When he built a boat, the wood told him how it wanted to curve. Here, the king's plan told the wood how it must be. He lived in a temporary hut outside the rampart. He ate bread and dried fish. He listened to the men talk. They spoke of the king's power. They said he was building other fortresses just like this one, Trelleborg, Eggersborg, all perfect circles. Some said they were for defending the kingdom. Others whispered they were for controlling it. Not a fortress. Like, this wasn't just to keep enemies out. It was to house the king's soldiers, to remind everyone who was in charge. A few of the older men grumbled. They were used to loyalty to a local jarl, not a distant king with a love for geometry. Bjorn worked at Firkat for 2 years. He saw the longhouses finished. He walked the timber-paved roads inside. It was clean, orderly, and immense. It felt powerful, but it also felt empty. It was a machine made of wood and earth, waiting for a purpose. Some soldiers moved in, they drilled in the central courtyard, but the Great War they seemed built for never quite came to this specific spot. The king had other concerns, other battles. 15 years later, Bjorn was an old man. He heard that Firkat was abandoned. The great longhouses were empty. The timber roads were overgrown with weeds. The perfect circle was still there, a giant scar on the landscape, but its purpose was gone. The king was dead. His grand, precise vision had lasted for a little while and then faded. Bjorn thought of all that oak, all that labor. A whole forest turned into a king's idea, an idea that held strong for a moment, for one generation, and was then reclaimed by the grass. Number 21, a poet was paid in silver, not praise. Egil Skallagrimsson was a complicated man. Sagas remember him as a great warrior, a killer, and an Icelandic farmer. But more than anything, he was a poet. In the 10th century, a good poet, a skald, was a powerful figure. A verse could preserve a king's fame forever, or it could destroy his reputation with a single sharp-edged stanza. Poetry was a weapon and a tool. Around 948, Egil found himself in serious trouble. He was shipwrecked on the coast of Northumbria in England. This land was ruled by his sworn enemy, King Eric Bloodaxe. Eric had once been king of Norway, but he had been driven out. Now he ruled here, and he hated Egil. Egil was captured and brought before the king in his hall at York, and Eric wanted him dead. The execution was set for the next morning. Egil's friend Bjorn was a man of influence in Eric's court. He pleaded for Egil's life, but the king would not listen, so Bjorn gave Egil some strange advice. He told him to stay up all night and compose a poem. Not just any poem, a great poem, a praise poem, a drapa, for the very man who was about to kill him. It was a desperate gamble. Egil, a man of immense pride, had to humble himself. He had to use his greatest skill to flatter his bitterest foe. He spent the entire night in a small dark room. He crafted 20 stanzas of the most complex Norse poetry. The form was called Drottgavad. It had a rigid structure of syllables, internal rhymes, and alliteration. It was a technical masterpiece. He also used Kenning's metaphorical phrases. He called Eric a feeder of eagles, a poetic way of saying he was a great warrior who left many dead on the battlefield. He praised his generosity, his ferocity, his kingly nature. The next morning, Egil was brought before Eric. The hall was silent. Egil stood tall and recited his poem from memory. He called it the Hofudlausen, or head ransom. He poured all his skill into the performance. The words filled the hall, painting pictures of Eric's might. When he finished, there was silence. King Eric sat on his throne unmoving. He had a choice. He could kill his enemy, satisfying his need for revenge. Or he could accept this great gift. To kill a man who had just presented him with such a magnificent poem, a poem that would be retold for generations, would make him look petty and unkingly. A great king, a feeder of eagles, should be generous. Eric made his decision. He granted Egil his life. He gave him his head. But that was all. He told Egil to leave his kingdom and never return. There was no payment for the poem. No armoring of gold, no fine cloak. The poem itself was the payment. It bought his life. Egil left York. He had survived, but the story reveals something about their world. A poem was not just art, it was a tangible thing. It had a price. In this case, the price was one man's head. A poet's words had real, measurable value. They could be traded for a life. Praise was good, but silver was better, and a head on one's shoulders was the best payment of all. Egil, the great skald, understood this better than anyone. He used his craft not just for fame, but for survival. Number 20, a woman inherited a sword and a problem. In the late 10th century, on the Snæfellsnes Peninsula in western Iceland, lived a woman named Thuridur. Her story is a small thread in the larger tapestry of the Eyrbyggja saga. She was the sister of a powerful and difficult chieftain named Snorri Goði. Thuridur was married to a man named Thorodr, a farmer and trader. They had a son named Kjartan. One year a ship from the Hebrides arrived in Iceland. On board was a group of people led by a woman named Thorgunna. She was old, large, and seemed to have some wealth. She sought lodging for the winter, and Thuridur and Thorodr took her in. Thorgunna was a Christian in a land that was still mostly pagan. She kept to herself, but was a good worker. As winter deepened, sickness came to the farm. Thorgunna fell ill. Knowing she was dying, she made a strange request to Thorodr. She had fine bedclothes, a rich tapestry, and sheets. She asked that, after her death, these be burned. She believed it was dangerous to keep the possessions of the dead. She also wanted her body to be taken to Skalholt in the south of Iceland for a proper Christian burial. Her wealth, a chest of silver and a gold ring, she left to the church there. Thorodr promised. But when Thorgunna died, his wife Thuridur saw the beautiful bedclothes. They were too fine to destroy. It seemed like a terrible waste. She convinced her husband to ignore that part of the promise. They gave Thorgunna a burial at a local church, not the distant Skalholt, and Thuridur kept the bedclothes. Soon after, strange things began to happen. A shepherd reported seeing the ghost of a recently deceased farmhand. Then a half-moon shape appeared on the wall of the longhouse, moving around the room night after night. A dried fish pile in the storehouse began to move on its own. People grew afraid. The hauntings grew worse. One evening, as the household sat around the fire, a seal's head began to rise out of the floor. The men struck at it with clubs, but it just retreated into the earth and rose up somewhere else. Fear turned to sickness. Several farmhands died. Thorodr decided to go fishing to get fresh food for the sick. A great storm blew up, and his boat was lost. He and his crew all drowned. Their bodies were recovered and buried. But that evening, as the survivors sat in the hall, the drowned men, led by Thorodr, walked in. They were soaking wet. They sat down by the fire and stayed there, silent, until the fire went out. They came back every night. The household was in a state of terror. The living were crowded out by the dead. Finally, Thuridur's son, Kjartan, sought the advice of his uncle, Snorri Goði. Snorri was a practical man. He understood the law. He told them to treat the matter like a legal dispute. He said they should summon the ghosts one by one to a door court. Kjartan and the remaining men stood at one door of the longhouse. Snorri stood at another. They formally accused the ghosts of trespassing and causing harm. One by one, they called the names of the dead. As each name was called, the ghost would stand up and say something like, "I have sat here while I was permitted." Then it would walk out and not return. They summoned Thorodr last. He too left. The hauntings were over. Finally, Snorri turned to the root of the problem. He told them to burn the bedclothes. They gathered the fine tapestry and sheets that Thuridur had saved and set them on fire. The problem, which started with a broken promise over an inheritance, was finally solved. It was not solved by magic or prayers, but by a combination of old beliefs and the formal procedures of law. A court was held for the dead. It was a practical solution to a supernatural problem. Number 19, a trader from Birka worried about his margins. His name was Raffin. He was not a warrior. He did not own land. He owned a share in a boat, a nar, built for cargo, not for speed. In the year 870, his world was the trading town of Birka, on an island in Lake Mälaren in what is now Sweden. Birka was not a village of farmers. It was a town of merchants, craftsmen, and sailors. It was a place of wood, wool, and foreign accents. Raffin's latest journey had been to the east, down the rivers to the land of the Rus. He had traded fine Swedish ironwork, swords, and axe heads for furs, sable, marten, and fox. The journey was long and dangerous. There were rapids to navigate and tribes who demanded a toll for passage. Raffin was good at calculating risk. He paid the tolls. It was cheaper than fighting. Now he was back in Burka. His furs were in a locked shed near the harbor. The town was buzzing. A ship had arrived from the west, from Hedeby in Denmark. It carried Frankish glassware and pottery from the Rhine. Raffin knew the merchant, a man named Leif, a loud man who liked to water his wine. Raffin's concern was simple: the price of fur. The market was changing. A few years ago, a good sable pelt could be traded for a string of fine glass beads. Now, with more traders going east, the supply of fur was increasing, the prices were dropping. At the same time, the Frankish kings were making it harder to get silver coins. The whole system was based on silver. You measured value in it, even if you traded in goods. Raffin sat on a coil of rope at the dock, mending a tear in a sail. He watched Leif's men unload their pottery. It was good quality, but heavy, risky to transport. Raffin preferred furs, light and valuable. But the margins were getting thin. He had to pay his crew. He had to pay a share of the profit to the man who owned the other half of the boat. He had to have enough left over to buy goods for the next trip. He had heard stories of a new source of silver, or dirhams from the Arab caliphates, traders who went far down the Volga, spoke of cities where silver was plentiful. But that journey was even longer, even more dangerous. It meant dealing with the Khazars and the Bulgars. It was a journey of a year or more. The risk was enormous, but the potential reward was too. A blacksmith, a man named Sten, stopped to talk. He wanted to buy some of Raffin's iron from the last trip. He complained about the quality of the local bog iron. Raffin agreed to sell him 3 bars, but not for silver. He traded it for 6 new iron cauldrons. He could trade the cauldrons to the Sami people in the north for reindeer hides. The hides sold well in Hedeby. This was Raffin's life, a constant calculation, a web of trades and exchanges. He did not think in terms of kingdoms or glory. He thought in terms of cargo weight, river tolls, market prices, and the trust he had in the men he traded with. His world was not defined by the borders of a kingdom, but by the reach of his boat. He was part of a network that connected the Rhine with the Volga, the Arctic with the Caliphate. He was just one man in that network, a man sitting on a dock in Burka, worrying about the falling price of fox fur. Number 18, a Greenland farmer counted his sheep and his days. His name was Ketil. He lived at the farm called Bertalid, but not in the main longhouse. He was a tenant farmer, working land owned by the chieftain Eirikir the Red. The year was 1005. They were living at the very edge of the known world, Greenland. Ketil's life was a cycle of hard seasons. The summer was short, a frantic period of growing hay and grazing animals. His wealth was not in silver, but in sheep, goats, and a few precious cows. He counted them every evening. Losing one to a fall or a sickness was a disaster. The winter was the true test. It was long, dark, and cold. The animals were brought into the byre, which was often connected to the longhouse for warmth. The family lived in close quarters, the smell of people and animals mixing with the smoke from the central fire. Food was monotonous skyr, a kind of yogurt, cheese, dried meat, and sometimes, if the hunt was good, seal or caribou. There was no grain for bread unless a ship from Iceland made it through, which was not every year. Ketil did not think much about the lands to the west that Leif Erikson had found a few years before. Vinland, they called it, a land of trees and grapes. It sounded like a fantasy. Ketil's world was rock, grass, and ice. And timber was so scarce, it was a form of treasure. They used driftwood for building. They used bone and soapstone for tools and vessels. Iron was imported and repaired over and over again until nothing was left. One of Ketil's biggest worries was the hay harvest. A wet summer meant poor hay. Poor hay meant weak animals in the winter. Weak animals meant less milk, less cheese, and the risk of having to slaughter your breeding stock to survive. It was a thin line between getting by and starvation. He also worried about his neighbors. The Greenland settlement was small, only a few hundred farms scattered along the fjords. Everyone knew everyone. A dispute over grazing rights could smolder for years. A borrowed tool that was not returned could break a friendship. The law brought from Iceland was important. The local assembly met each spring. Ketil had attended once to bear witness for a neighbor in a dispute over a stranded whale. A whale was a gift from the sea, a mountain of meat and blubber. Who got what share was a serious matter, and Ketil's wife Grima was in charge of the dairy. She made the skyr and the cheese that had to last them through the winter. She wove the wool from their sheep into cloth, wadmal, which was so important it was used as a form of currency. A tunic had a price in wadmal. A debt could be paid in it. They were Christians. A bishop had come from Iceland. There was a small turf church at Brattahlid, but old beliefs died hard. Grima still put a bowl of milk out for the land spirits, just in case. It was best not to take chances. Ketil did not see himself as a Viking. That word meant a raider, a pirate. He was a farmer, a bondi. His great adventure was not crossing the sea to raid a monastery. It was surviving another Greenland winter. It was making sure his children had enough to eat. His saga was written not in heroic verse, but in the notches on a stick he used to count his sheep. Each notch was a small victory against the cold and the dark at the edge of the world. In number 17, a law speaker at the Althing New Memory was the law. In the summer of 999, Thorgeir Ljósvetningagoti stood before a crowd of people. He was not on a battlefield. He was on a rock. The place was Thingvellir in Iceland. This was the Althing, the General Assembly of the entire country. And Thorgeir had a problem to solve that could tear the new nation apart. Thorgeir was the law speaker, the Lögsogumadur. For 3 years, he was the most powerful man in Iceland, but his power was strange. He had no army. He commanded no ships. His power was in his head. His job was to memorize the entire body of Icelandic law and recite 1/3 of it from memory at the Althing each year. The law was not written down. It lived in his mind. When a dispute arose, people came to the law speaker. He would speak the law, telling them what the ancient customs and precedents said. The problem he faced was religion. Iceland was divided. Missionaries from King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway had been converting people to Christianity. They were aggressive. The king was holding Icelandic chieftains' sons as hostages in Norway to force the conversion. The pagans who followed the old gods, Thor, Odin, and Freyja, were angry. They saw the new religion as a foreign intrusion. At the Althing that summer, the two sides nearly came to blows. The Christians declared they would no longer share a law with the pagans. The pagans said the same. It was a constitutional crisis. A country with two laws was not a country at all. It was a civil war waiting to happen. The chieftains of both factions, seeing the danger, turned to Thorgeir. They made a deal. They would all abide by whatever single law he chose for the whole island. It was an incredible burden. The fate of the nation was placed on one man's judgment. Thorgeir did something unusual. He went back to his turf-covered booth. He lay down and pulled a cloak over his head. He stayed like that for a full day and a night. He did not speak. He did not eat. He was thinking. He was weighing the arguments. He was searching through his memory of the law, looking for a path that would not lead to bloodshed. He was not praying to Odin or to the Christian god. He was engaged in a deep, silent process of legal and political calculation. The next day, he emerged. He walked to the Logberg, the Law Rock. He began to speak. He said that a divided nation could not stand. He said that if they fought amongst themselves, the island would be laid waste. The Norwegian king would see their weakness and might try to conquer them. Their freedom was at stake. Then he laid out his compromise. He declared that all people in Iceland should be Christian and be baptized. This satisfied the Christian faction and the Norwegian king. But then he added conditions. People could still expose unwanted infants, a common pagan practice. They could still eat horseflesh, which was forbidden by the church, but a part of old rituals. And most importantly, they could continue to sacrifice to the old gods in private. As long as there were no witnesses, it was not against the law. It was a brilliant solution. It created a public national identity that was Christian, which was necessary for foreign relations with the rest of Europe. But it allowed for private, personal belief to continue. It valued social peace over theological purity. It was a legal fix, not a spiritual one. The assembly agreed. The crisis was over. Iceland became Christian by a legal decree, not by a war. Thorgeir's decision was based on his deep understanding of the law and his practical assessment of the political reality. His power came not from a sword, but from memory reason, and the trust his people placed in him to find a way forward. Number 16, a Varangian guard in Constantinople missed the cold. His name was Kolbein. In the year 1040, he stood guard on a marble terrace overlooking the Golden Horn in Constantinople. He was a long way from his home in the Mälaren Valley of Sweden. He was a member of the Varangian Guard, the elite bodyguard of the Byzantine emperor. Kolbein was tall and fair-haired. He stood out among the Greeks. He wore a uniform of silk, dyed a deep imperial purple. He carried a heavy, long, bladed axe over his shoulder. This axe, the Pelikiforos, was the symbol of the guard. He was well paid in gold coin, solidus, stamped with the image of the Emperor Michael IV. Life in the great city, Miklagard, was overwhelming. It was a maze of stone streets, towering churches with golden domes, and markets filled with smells he had never imagined. Spices from the east, perfumes, strange foods. The wealth was staggering. He had seen the emperor in procession, surrounded by eunuchs and officials, all draped in gold and jewels. It made the halls of the Swedish jarls look like rustic barns. But he was often bored. His duty was to stand still for hours. He had to look fierce and imposing. He had to be a living statue, a symbol of the emperor's power, a warning to any assassin. He stood guard outside the imperial chambers, in the hippodrome during the chariot races, or in the great church of Hagia Sophia. He did not understand the Greek they spoke in the court. He did not understand the complex politics of the empire, the plots and schemes that happened in the shadows. He just had to protect the emperor's body. He missed the simple things. He missed the sharp, clean cold of a Swedish winter. He missed the taste of fresh milk. He missed the sound of his own language spoken freely on the street. He lived in barracks with other Norsemen, Rus, and Anglo-Saxons. They drank and gambled and told stories of home. They were a brotherhood of foreigners, loyal only to the emperor who paid them. Their loyalty was famous. They were known for being incorruptible, unlike the local troops. Sometimes there was action, a riot in the city, a campaign against the Bulgars in the mountains to the north. Kolbein had fought in one such campaign. It was brutal, messy fighting. He was good at it. His long axe was a terrifying weapon in close combat. He had earned a bonus for his bravery. He kept the gold coins in a small leather pouch under his tunic. His goal was to save enough gold to go home. He wanted to buy a farm, a good one, with plenty of land. He wanted to be his own man, a respected landholder. That was true wealth. The silk and the city life were temporary. A man needed land. He had seen what happened to Varangians who stayed too long. Some grew old and died in this foreign city. Some were killed in forgotten battles. Some spent all their gold on wine and women. Kolbein was careful. He was saving. He looked at the runestone. One of his comrades, a man named Sven, had carved it on the marble balustrade of the upper gallery in Hagia Sophia. It just said Halfdan was here. It was a simple message, a scratch on the surface of this immense ancient city. A reminder that a man from the north had passed this way. Kolbein understood the impulse. It was a way of saying, I existed. I stood on this spot. He ran his thumb over the familiar shapes of the runes. It felt like a piece of home. Number 15, a woman on the Isle of Man, left a cross for her husband. Her name was Lif. She lived on the Isle of Man, in the middle of the Irish Sea around the year 960. The island was a mix of cultures. It had a long Celtic history, but for the last century it had been settled by Norse people. They were farmers, traders, and sometimes raiders. Cliff's family was Norse. Her husband had been a man named Asbjorn. Asbjorn had died the previous winter. He had not died in a raid or a great battle. A sickness had taken him, a fever that burned for 3 days and then left him cold. Lif was left to manage their small farm with her 2 sons, who were barely men. She wanted to mark his grave. She wanted to honor him in a way that would last. In the old days, a great chieftain might be buried in a ship or under a large mound of earth. But times were changing. Christianity had come to the island, the new faith mixed with the old ways. Lif commissioned a stone carver. He was a local man, a master of his craft. He knew both the old Norse artistic styles and the new Christian symbols. Lif told him what she wanted. A tall, slender cross carved from the local stone. It would stand in the churchyard. The stone that was created became known as Thorleif's Cross, but it was Leif's commission. It told a story. The carver decorated it with intricate patterns. On one side, he carved the familiar shape of the Christian cross, covered in the looping ribbon like animals of the Norse Ringerike style. It was a beautiful fusion, faith and heritage woven together in stone. But on the other side, Lif wanted a different story. She wanted the story of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. It was a story from the old pagan world, a story of heroism and fate. The carver chiseled the scenes into the stone. There was Sigurd hiding in a pit, thrusting his sword Graham up into the soft belly of the dragon Fafnir. There was Sigurd roasting the dragon's heart over a fire. There he was, tasting the dragon's blood, and suddenly understanding the language of the birds, who warned him of a betrayal. This was not a Christian story, it was a saga in stone. Why would Hlif, a Christian woman in a Christian graveyard, put this pagan hero on her husband's memorial? Perhaps she saw Asbjorn in Sigurd, a man who faced the dangers of the world. Perhaps the story was a way to connect her husband to the great heroes of their ancestors, to give him a place in the grand narrative of their people. Or perhaps the story had a deeper meaning. Sigurd was a hero who was betrayed and killed. The story was a meditation on fate, courage, and mortality. By placing it on the cross, Lif was blending the 2 worlds she lived in, the world of her Norse ancestors and the world of her new Christian faith. The cross offered salvation in the next life. The saga offered a model for how to live and die bravely in this one. The cross was raised. Lif would have seen it every time she went to church. It was a public declaration of her grief, her love for her husband, and her identity. It said, "We are Norse. We are Christian. We remember our old stories. We believe in the new faith." It was a complex statement carved in stone by a woman who wanted to make sure her husband and her world would not be forgotten. Number 14, a slave in Iceland bought his freedom 1 cow at a time. His name was Erp. He was born in Ireland in the late 9th century. As a young boy, his village was raided by Norsemen. He was taken, put on a ship, and brought to Iceland. He was sold at a market to a chieftainess named Otter the Deep-Minded. He was now a thrall, a slave. Erper's life was one of labor. He tended sheep, mucked out byres, and dug turf. He had no rights. He could be bought and sold. He ate what was left over. He slept on the floor of the longhouse or in an outbuilding. He owned nothing but the clothes on his back. But Otter, his owner, was an unusual woman. She was a Christian, and the sagas say she was wise and fair. She had led her entire household from Scotland to settle in Iceland. She was the one who gave out land to her followers. The law in Iceland provided a path to freedom for a thrall. It was not easy. A slave could, with his master's permission, work for himself in his spare time. He could raise a few animals of his own. If he could accumulate enough wealth to equal his own purchase price, he could buy his freedom. This was called lesingi, or a freedman. Erpr was determined, he was clever, and a hard worker. Otter allowed him a small plot of land to work for himself. He started with a single lamb, a gift from another of Otter's men. He tended it carefully. He built a small business on the side, carving bone combs and tools, which he traded for things he needed. It was a slow process. It took years. Every purchase was a major decision, a new tool, or save the value towards another sheep. He had to be patient. He had to earn the trust of his owner. He had to navigate the social world of the farm where he was at the very bottom. The sagas do not detail his daily struggle. They just state the outcome. The Landnámabók, the Book of Settlements, says that Otter freed her slaves. It says she gave Erpur a piece of land, a valley called Erpsdalr. He became a farmer, a landholder. He went from being property to owning property. This was a profound transformation. As a freedman, he was not yet equal to a free-born man. He still had obligations to his former master. But he was his own man. He could marry. His children would be born free. He could participate in the local assembly. He had a voice. The story of Erpur is rare because the sagas mostly talk about chieftains and warriors. The lives of the unfree are usually silent, but his story, and others like it, show that the system was not entirely rigid. There was a way up. It was not through heroism on the battlefield, but through slow, patient, hard work. It was freedom earned one cow, one sheep, one carved bone comb at a time. Erpur's valley, Erpsdalr, was not a gift. It was the result of a lifetime of quiet, relentless effort. Number 13a, Bishop in Hamburg, wrote down what he heard about the pagans. Adam of Bremen was a churchman and a scholar. He lived in the 11th century. He was not a Viking. He was a German canon who served the Archbishop of Hamburg-Bremen. Around 1075, he wrote a history of his archdiocese, the Gesta Hamburgensis Ecclesiae Pontificum. His job was to record the spread of Christianity into the north, into Scandinavia. To write his history, he talked to people. He was especially interested in what the Danish king, Svein Estridsson, told him. Svein was a Christian, but he had grown up in the old world. He knew the stories and the customs of the pagans. Adam wrote down what the king told him, even though it horrified him. He wrote about a place in the land of the Swedes called Uppsala. He described a great temple there, all adorned with gold. In this temple, he said, the people worshipped 3 statues. In the center was Thor, the most powerful. On either side were Wotan Odin and Frigga. Adam described their supposed roles. Thor ruled the sky, governing thunder, wind, and rain. Wotan was the god of war and gave men courage. Frigga bestowed peace and pleasure. Adam also described in grim detail the great festival held at Uppsala every 9 years. It was a national event. The king and all the people were required to attend. He wrote that they sacrificed 9 males of every living creature, horses, dogs, and men. Their bodies, he was told, were hung from the branches of the trees in a sacred grove next to the temple. He wrote that a Christian told him he had seen 72 bodies hanging there together. We do not know how much of this is true. Adam never went to Uppsala. He was reporting secondhand information. He was a Christian writing for a Christian audience. He wanted to show the darkness and barbarity of the pagans to highlight the light and civility of his own faith. Well, he may have exaggerated. He may have misunderstood some of the things he was told. The number 9 was significant in Norse mythology, so the details might have a symbolic meaning. Archaeology has not found the Great Golden Temple at Uppsala. They have found large post holes that suggest great buildings stood there. They have found evidence of feasting and ritual activity, but the physical evidence is ambiguous. What Adam's writing gives us is not a perfect photograph of paganism. It is a glimpse of how the Norse pagans were seen by their Christian neighbors. It is a view from the outside. It shows a religion that was public, communal, and tied to the well-being of the kingdom. The sacrifices, if they happened as he described, were not for personal gain. They were a national ritual to ensure good harvests and victory in war. Adam of Bremen was trying to document the end of an era. So he was a historian of the church, writing about the very people his church was trying to convert. He preserved a description of a world he found repellent, but also fascinating. His text is a fragment, a distorted echo of a belief system that was about to disappear. He heard a story about a temple of gold and trees of death, and he wrote it down. Number 12, a runemaster on Gotland created an advertisement in stone. In the 11th century, on the island of Gotland in the Baltic Sea, a man named Rodvisil had a problem. His business partner Rodgeir had died while on a trading journey far to the south in Wallachia, a region near the lower Danube. This was a personal loss, but it was also a business problem. Their partnership was dissolved. Rodvisil needed to settle his partner's affairs and, more importantly, establish his own reputation as a reliable and successful merchant. He could not just put up a sign. He did something far more permanent. He hired a rune master, a skilled carver, to create a memorial stone. The stone, known today as the Schonheim Stone, was not just a memorial, it was a public statement. It was a piece of advertising. The stone was carved with an inscription in runes, running along the body of a looping, stylized serpent. The text was carefully composed. It read, Rodvisil and Hrodelfer, they had this stone raised in memory of Rodgeir, their father. He died in Wallachia. Gudve had this stone raised in memory of her husband, Rodvisil, Rodgeir's partner, made this memorial. The text is complex. It seems to be two memorials in one. The first part is from the sons Rodvil and Rodelfar for their father. But then it seems to correct itself or add more information. It names the wife Gudve. And then crucially, it identifies Rodvil as the business partner, the Falagi. This was important. The word Falagi comes from Falag, meaning a laying together of property. It implies a formal business partnership, a sharing of risk and profit. By carving this on a public monument, Rodvils was doing several things at once. First, he was honoring his dead partner. This showed he was a loyal and honorable man. Second, he was publicizing the extent of their business. They were trading as far away as Wallachia. This was a long and dangerous journey, suggesting they were successful and ambitious merchants. This would impress other traders and potential investors. Third, by naming himself as the partner who commissioned the stone, he was positioning himself as the one to carry on the business. He was the responsible one, the one who settled affairs, the one to be trusted. The stone was also decorated with images. Above the runes there is a carving of a man on horseback being greeted by a woman holding a drinking horn. This is likely Odin being welcomed into Valhalla. It connects the dead merchant to the world of heroes. It gave his death on a distant trade route a sense of honor and importance. The stone was placed where people would see it, likely near a road or a public meeting place. Every person who passed would be reminded of Rodvisil's family, his successful business, his long-distance connections, and his honorable character. It was a message carved in granite. It was far more effective than a simple announcement. It was a permanent record of his social and economic standing. In a world with no paper contracts or corporate reports, a runestone was a powerful way to build a brand. Number 11, a farmer in Norway buried his best sword and his worst beads. In the year 875, a man died in a small farming community called Vinja in western Norway. He was not a king or a great earl. He was a local landowner, a man of some status in his community. His family prepared him for his journey to the next life. They buried him in a grave with the things they thought he would need, or the things that represented his life. The grave was excavated by archaeologists nearly 1,100 years later. It contained a collection of objects that tell a complex story. The man was buried with his weapons, a sword, a spearhead, and an axe. The sword was a fine one. The blade was made of high-quality steel, likely imported from the Frankish Empire. The hilt was decorated with silver. It was the weapon of a warrior, a man of status. This was the image he and his family wanted to project. He was a man to be respected, a man of power. He was also buried with his farming tools, a scythe and a sickle. This was the other side of his identity. He was not just a warrior, he was a farmer, a bondi. His wealth came from the land. His life was governed by the seasons of planting and harvesting. The tools of his trade were as important to his identity as his sword. But the most curious objects in the grave were a set of 47 beads. Most were simple glass beads, common trade items. But two of them were different. They were made of mosaic glass, millefiori, of a type that was already ancient by the 9th century. They were Roman, made hundreds of years earlier. They were heirlooms, passed down through generations. They were a connection to a distant, almost mythical past. And then there was one more bead. It was a counterfeit. It was a cheap, locally made bead designed to look like a valuable carnelian bead from the East. It was a fake. Why would they bury a man with his finest weapon and a worthless imitation bead? The answer lies in the way they thought about wealth and status. The sword was a symbol of his power and his role as a protector of the community. The ancient Roman beads were a symbol of his family's deep roots and long history. They connected him to a glorious past. The fake bead tells a different story. It suggests that he or someone in his family was engaged in the world of trade. They knew what valuable goods from far away looked like. They might have even tried to pass off the fake as the real thing in a local transaction. It reveals an economic life that was not just about farming and raiding. It was about markets, appearances, and maybe a little bit of deception. The collection of items in this one grave gives us a complete picture of this man. He was a warrior. He was a farmer. He was the inheritor of ancient family treasures, and he was a participant in a commercial world where things were not always what they seemed. His family buried him with all the parts of his identity, the glorious and the practical, the authentic and the counterfeit. They sent him to the afterlife with everything that had made him who he was. Number 10, a queen builds a world without a king. Audr Ketilsdatir was born in Norway around the year 834. Her father was a powerful chieftain. She was married to Olaf the White, the Norse king of Dublin. She was a queen in a bustling, violent, and wealthy new city, but her life of relative stability fell apart. Her husband was killed in battle in Ireland. Her only son, Thorstein the Red, went to Scotland, conquered a large part of it, and made himself a king. Then he too was killed, betrayed by his own people. Audr, now a widow in her late 50s, was in a precarious position in Scotland. She had no husband, no son to protect her. She had a household to care for, including her son's widow and several grandchildren. She could have sought protection by marrying another chieftain. She chose a different path. She secretly commissioned a ship to be built in the forest. It was a Nar, a deep-hulled, seaworthy vessel designed for open ocean travel. When it was finished, she loaded it with her entire household. This included her grandchildren, her servants, her retainers, and a significant amount of wealth. The saga says she had 20 free men with her. She was the captain. She sailed her ship from Scotland, first to the Orkney and Faroe Islands. In both places, she stopped and arranged marriages for her granddaughters, establishing family alliances and securing her network. This was not a panicked flight. It was a carefully planned strategic relocation. Her final destination was Iceland. The island was a new land, a place where a person's status was not determined by ancient family holdings, but by who got there first and claimed land. Audr arrived in the Breiðafjörður region in the west of Iceland. She was one of the 4 most important original settlers, and she sailed her ship deep into Hvammsfjörður and claimed a huge swath of land, all the dale lands between 2 rivers. She was the matriarch. She established a farm at a place she named Hvammr. She was not just a landowner. She was a chieftain in her own right, a dispenser of patronage. She gave land to the men who had followed her. She gave them their start in this new world, and in return, they owed her their loyalty. The Laxdæla saga tells us she was a Christian. She had a cross erected on a hill where she would go to pray. This was unusual in the mostly pagan world of early Iceland. But perhaps the most remarkable thing she did was what she did with her slaves. Before she died, she freed them. To one, a man named Erpr, whose story we have already heard, she gave a valley for his own farm. She gave land and freedom to others as well. She was not just building a family estate, she was building a community. When she felt her life was ending, she prepared a great funeral feast for her family and followers. She formally handed over the farm at Hvammr to her grandson Olaf. She oversaw the feast, ensuring her legacy was secure. She died that night and was given a ship burial, a pagan honor for a Christian matriarch. Audr, known as Audr the Deep-Minded, was a refugee who refused to be a victim. She was a widow who refused to be powerless. She was a queen without a kingdom who sailed across the ocean and built a new world for her people on her own terms. Number 9, a man in Sweden described the end of the world on a rock. The stone stands in a field in Östergötland, Sweden. It is a massive block of granite nearly 2.5 meters tall. It is covered on 5 sides with over 760 runes. This is the rock stone. It was carved in the early 9th century. The man who commissioned it, Verin, created it as a memorial to his dead son, Vamod. But it is much more than a memorial. You know, it is a riddle. The inscription begins simply enough. In memory of Vamod stand these runes, and Verin, the father, made them in memory of his dead son. But then, it plunges into a series of cryptic questions and allusions. Verin is not just mourning, he is showing off his knowledge. He is a master of lore, poetry, and mythology. He asks his reader a series of questions. I say this the second, who 9 generations ago was born to the Raidgoths, and he is not yet dead. This is a riddle whose answer is lost to us. He then seems to refer to Theodoric the Great, the Ostrogothic king who ruled Italy 300 years earlier, describing him as the chief of sea warriors. But the most powerful and enigmatic part of the stone deals with the end of the world, Ragnarok. Verin uses poetic veiled language. He asks, I say this the 12th, where the horse of Gunnar sees food on the battlefield, where 12 kings lie. The horse of Gunnar is a kenning, a poetic metaphor for a wolf. Gunnar is a Valkyrie, so Verin is painting a picture of a wolf feasting on a battlefield. He continues with an even darker image. This I tell a 13th, which 20 kings were on the plain of Shialand for 4 winters, with 4 names born to 4 brothers. 5 with the name Valk, sons of Radolf. 5 with the name Hredolv, sons of Rugolv. 5 with the name Heisel, sons of Hard. 5 with the name Gunmund, sons of Bjorn. This long list of names may refer to forgotten kings or heroes, or it may be symbolic. It creates a sense of a great, epic past, a world of heroes now gone. Then comes the climax. I tell a truth, a vengeful son is born. He, the son of Odin, will fight when he is 1 night old. This likely refers to Vali, the son of Odin, who was born for the sole purpose of avenging the death of the god Balder. This act of vengeance is one of the key events that sets Ragnarok in motion. Finally, Verin seems to offer a message of hope, or at least of memory. Now I have told all. Sigi is the guardian of the memorial. By naming a guardian, he is trying to ensure the stone and its stories will be preserved. The rockstone is Verin's lament for his son, but it is also a monument to his own learning and a deep meditation on memory loss and the great cycles of myth. He is placing his personal grief, the death of his son Vamod, within the grandest story. He knows the story of the death of the gods and the end of the world. It is as if he is saying that his son's death is a small Ragnarok, a personal apocalypse. In a world without a written literature, Verin used this massive stone to record the deepest knowledge of his culture, all to make sense of the loss of one young man. Number 8, 2 skeletons in a ship told a story of power. In 1904, a farmer near the Oslofjord in Norway discovered a ship. It was buried under a large mound of earth. The ship, known as the Oseberg ship, was a stunning piece of craftsmanship. It was a long, elegant vessel built of oak, with a high, curving prow carved into the shape of a serpent's head. It dated to the year 834. Inside the ship, archaeologists found the remains of 2 women. For a long time, it was assumed that the older woman was the more important one, a queen, and the younger woman was her sacrificed servant. But recent analysis of their bones has changed the story. The older woman was about 80 years old when she died. Her skeleton showed she had suffered from advanced cancer, which must have caused her great pain. She also had a condition called Morgagni's syndrome, which would have given her a masculine appearance, including a beard. She was a woman of very high status, but she was old and sick. The younger woman was around 50 years old. Her skeleton was healthy. An analysis of the food she ate, preserved in her teeth, showed she had a diet rich in meat, a sign of high status. The older woman's diet was less rich. This was a surprise. Furthermore, a broken collarbone on the younger woman had healed well, suggesting she had received good care during her life. This was not the skeleton of a servant. The grave goods buried with them were astonishing. Finely carved wooden chests, a cart with intricate carvings, beds, tapestries, kitchen equipment, and the bones of 15 horses and 4 dogs. This was a burial of immense wealth and power. So who were these 2 women? The new evidence suggests they were not a queen and her servant. They may have been a queen and her trusted advisor, or perhaps the younger, healthier woman was the one in power and she was honoring her elderly, respected relative or mentor with this grand burial. Another theory is that they were religious leaders. The carvings on the ship and the cart include images of animals and mysterious figures that might be from Norse mythology. They could have been priestesses of a fertility cult, powerful figures in their community whose authority came from their connection to the gods. The story the Oseberg ship tells is not a simple one. It reveals that power in the Viking Age was not just held by men with swords. These 2 women commanded immense resources. They had the authority to commission this magnificent ship, to have these precious objects made, and to have them all buried in a monumental mound that would have taken a whole community to build. Their burial is a silent saga. It speaks of female power, of wealth, and of beliefs we can only guess at. The older woman in pain from her illness and the younger woman, strong and well-fed, were laid to rest together in this beautiful vessel, sent on their final journey with all the markers of their high status in this world. Number 7. A Norseman in Canada repaired a single iron nail. The place is now called Lanceau Meadows. It is on the northern tip of Newfoundland in Canada. Around the year 1000, a group of Norse people built a small settlement here. It was not a large colony. It was a base camp, a place to spend the winter and repair their ships while they explored this new land they called Vinland. Our archaeologists have uncovered the remains of their buildings. They were longhouses built of turf over a wooden frame, in the same style as houses in Greenland and Iceland. They found a smithy, a small hut, where a blacksmith worked. In the floor of this smithy, they found hundreds of small pieces of iron slag, and a single precious iron nail. This nail tells a story. The Norse who came to Vinland had a huge technological advantage over the native people they met. They had iron, but they had a problem. They could not make new iron here. To make iron from ore requires a large, hot furnace and vast quantities of charcoal, which means cutting down a lot of trees. They were a small group, far from home. They could not set up a major industrial operation, so the iron they had was all the iron they were going to get. Every piece was valuable. The nail found in the smithy was a ship's rivet, used to hold the planks of their ship together. It had likely been damaged or worked loose during the long voyage across the Atlantic. The blacksmith at Lanceau Meadows did not throw it away. He carefully heated it in his small forge using local bog iron ore as a flux. He hammered it back into shape. He repaired it. This was the work of the smithy, not making new things, but maintaining and repairing the essential iron tools and ship parts they had brought with them. The settlement at Lanceau Meadows did not last long, maybe a decade or 2 at most. The sagas speak of conflicts with the native people, whom they called Skraelings. But the real problem may have been more practical. It was just too far. The supply line back to Greenland and Iceland was too long and too dangerous. They could not sustain a colony here. The single repaired nail is a symbol of their situation. They were skilled, technologically advanced people. They could cross the ocean, they could build houses in a new continent, but they were at the end of a very long rope. Their resources were finite. They could patch and mend, but they could not build anew. The Great Viking expansion was not an unstoppable force. It had limits. The limit was reached here, in a small turf settlement on the coast of Newfoundland. The story of Vinland is not one of glorious conquest. It is a story of a small group of people trying to survive in a new world, carefully repairing a single iron nail because they knew they could not get another one. Number 6, a chieftain in gelling used 2 big stones to announce a new era. Harald Bluetooth became king of Denmark around the year 958. His father was Gorm the Old. Gorm was a pagan, a man of the old ways. He had set up a runestone to honor his wife Thyra. It was a simple, traditional memorial. Harald was different. He had ambitions. He wanted to unite the tribes of Denmark into a single Christian kingdom under his rule. He needed to make a powerful public statement. He did it with 2 massive stones set up in the royal center of Jelling. The first stone was a smaller one, which he raised in memory of his parents, Gorm and Thyra. This was an act of a dutiful son, honoring his lineage. It connected him to the past. But the second stone was the important one. It was huge, a 3-sided pyramid of granite. It was covered in carvings and runes. It was a declaration, a press release in stone for the whole world to see. On one side, he carved a great beast, a lion entwined with a serpent. This was a symbol of power, of his strength as a king. It faced the past, the great burial mound of his father. On another side, he had a figure of Christ carved. This was one of the earliest images of Christ in Scandinavia. He is shown with his arms outstretched, not on a cross, but entangled in the branches of what looks like the Tree of Life. It was a Norse interpretation of a Christian image. It was a powerful symbol of the new faith. This side faced the new church that Harald had built at Jelling. The third side carried the inscription. The runes were carved in neat horizontal lines like a page in a book. This was a new style, a departure from the traditional winding serpent bands. The text was clear and bold. King Haraldr ordered this monument made in memory of Gormr, his father, and in memory of Thurv, his mother, that Haraldr who won for himself all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. This was a remarkable statement. He was taking credit for 3 huge achievements. He united Denmark. He conquered Norway, and he converted his people to Christianity. It was a political and religious manifesto. He was announcing the birth of a nation and a new religious identity. The Jelling Stone was a turning point. It marked the end of the old fragmented pagan world and the beginning of the new era of centralized Christian kingdoms in Scandinavia. Harald was using all the tools at his disposal, the traditional runestone, powerful new imagery, and clear, confident text. He was defining himself in his kingdom. He was not just a chieftain, he was a king of a unified Christian nation. He had it carved in stone so no one would ever forget it. Number 5, a poet on a Scottish island, chiseled a poem about breaking into a tomb. In the winter of 1153, a group of Norsemen found themselves stuck in the Orkney Islands north of Scotland. They were led by a man named Earl Rongvald Cally Colson. They were on their way to the Holy Land on a crusade, but bad weather had forced them to wait out the winter in Orkney. The men were bored. They were warriors, sailors, and poets. They drank and told stories. One day, a group of them decided on an adventure. They would break into Maeshowe. And Maeshowe was a huge ancient burial mound built by people 5,000 years earlier. To the Norsemen, it was a place of legend, the kind of place where you might find treasure or encounter ghosts. They found the entrance, which had been sealed with massive stones. It took them a long time to clear it. Well, they crawled down a long, narrow stone passageway into the central chamber of the tomb. Inside, it was dark and silent. They lit torches. The chamber was a marvel of ancient engineering, built with huge, perfectly fitted flagstones. They did not find a great treasure of gold. The tomb had likely been looted centuries before, but they found something else. They found a space to leave their own mark. Over the next few days, different groups of men from Roggenwald's crew visited the tomb, and they started to write on the walls. They used their knives and axe points to carve runes into the stone. They left over 30 different runic inscriptions. They are the largest collection of such carvings in the world. They are not solemn memorials, they are graffiti. Some of them are simple. Ingigirth is the most beautiful of all women. Thorny, fucked, Helgi carved, summer boasts. These runes were carved by the man most skilled in runes in the Western Ocean. Another says, it was long ago that a great treasure was hidden here. Happy is he that might find that great treasure. You know, one of the most elaborate inscriptions was a poem carved in the formal Drottgvat style. It describes their journey and their boredom. It says that the Crusaders broke into the mound. It mentions that treasure was carried off from the mound 3 nights before they broke in. It's a joke, a piece of poetic bravado carved into a 5,000-year-old wall. The Maisho runes are a unique window into the minds of these 12th century Norsemen, where they were literate. They were Christians on their way to Jerusalem, but they were also steeped in the old culture of sagas, poetry, and treasure-seeking. They saw this ancient tomb not just as a sacred place, but as a challenge, a place to explore, and a surface on which to write their own stories. They broke into a prehistoric tomb and left behind a few poems, some crude jokes, and their names. They wanted the world to know they had been there. Number 4, a man named Bjorn became a man named Christian. The Bjorn was a farmer who lived near the shores of Lake Vättern in Sweden. The year was around 1050. His family had lived on that land for generations. They had always made sacrifices to the local land spirits for a good harvest and to Thor for protection. But things were changing. A new church had been built a half-day's walk from his farm. It was made of wood, small and dark. A priest from Germany lived there. He spoke of one God and of a man named Jesus who was his son. The priest said that their old gods were demons. He said that sacrificing to them was a sin. Bjorn was skeptical. The old ways had worked for his father and his grandfather. But his chieftain, the man to whom he owed loyalty, had converted. The chieftain had been baptized. He was encouraging his people to do the same. It was a political matter as much as a religious one. To be Christian was to be modern. It was to be connected to the powerful kingdoms to the south. Bjorn's wife Astrid was curious. She had gone to the church. She said the priest's songs were beautiful. She was worried about their youngest child, who was often sick. The priest had said that the Christian God could heal the sick. The pressure mounted. One of his neighbors refused to be baptized. The chieftain declared him an outlaw. He had to leave his farm and his land. Bjorn had a family to think of. He made a decision. He went to the priest. The priest asked him to renounce his old gods. Bjorn stood by a stream. The priest asked him, "Do you forsake the devil and all his works?" The priest used the name of Odin. Bjorn hesitated. He had always seen Odin as a god of wisdom and poetry, not a devil. But he said the words. The priest poured water over his head. He made the sign of the cross on his forehead. He said, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." He gave Bjorn a new name. Well, Christian? It was not a common name. It was a statement. Bjorn went home. He felt strange. He was no longer Bjorn. He was Christian. He took the small wooden figures of Thor and Freyja from the shelf in his longhouse. He did not know what to do with them. He could not bring himself to burn them. He wrapped them in a cloth and buried them at the edge of his property. It felt like burying his ancestors. Life changed in small ways. He had to go to the church on Sundays. He could no longer eat horseflesh. When his child died that winter, the priest told him it was God's will. The priest said the child was now an angel in heaven. It was a different kind of comfort than the old ways offered. It was a comfort mixed with submission to a power he could not understand. Christian lived for another 20 years. He became a respected man in the new Christian community. But sometimes, when a thunderstorm rolled in across the lake, he would find himself looking to the sky and whispering the name of Thor, just out of habit. The conversion of his people was not a sudden flash of light. It was a slow, difficult, and sometimes painful process of letting go of one world and learning to live in another. Number 3, a mother and son left their names on a stone in Greece. In The 11th century, a woman named Gudlag lived in Uppland, Sweden. Her son was named Holmi. Holmi was like many young men of his time. He wanted to see the world, to seek his fortune. He joined a group of men and went Viking. This did not just mean raiding. It meant traveling, trading, and serving as a mercenary. Holmi's journey took him farther than most. He went to Greece. He likely served in the Varangian Guard, the Byzantine Emperor's elite mercenary force in Constantinople. It was a common path for adventurous Swedes. We do not know the details of his life there. We only know that he died. The news, after a long delay, eventually made its way back to his mother in Sweden. Gudlaug was heartbroken, but she was also a woman of means and status. She had to commemorate her son. She hired a famous rune master, Opir, one of the most prolific and skilled carvers of his time. She commissioned a runestone. The stone she had raised is known as U-136. The inscription reads, Gudlaug had this stone raised in memory of her son Holmi, who was killed in Lombardy and Opir carved. Lombardy, in this context, was a term the Norse used for southern Italy, which was part of the Byzantine Empire. And so Holmi died fighting for the emperor, far from home. But this was not the only stone. Another stone, U-141, tells a connected story. It was raised by the same woman, Gudlaug. This one says, Gudlaug had this stone and a bridge made in memory of her son Holmi, who owned a farm at Tang. This stone gives us more information. Holmi was not just an adventurer, he was a landowner, he had a farm, he had roots in his community. The mention of the bridge is significant. Building a bridge was considered a pious and socially beneficial act. It eased travel and trade for the whole community. By building a bridge in her son's memory, Gudlaug was doing more than just mourning. She was converting her personal grief into a public good. She was ensuring that her son would be remembered not just as a distant warrior, but as a benefactor to his home community. Every person who crossed that bridge would be reminded of Holmi and of his mother's devotion. A third stone, U-135, completes the family story. It stands near the other two. It was raised by the same rune master, Opir. The inscription reads, Gudlaug had this stone raised in memory of her husband Gilaug, who was Holmi's father. Together, these three stones are a family's history written across the landscape. They tell a story of a father, Gilaug, a son, Holmi, and a mother, Gudlaug. They speak of land ownership, of adventure and death in a foreign land, and of a mother's enduring effort to preserve the memory of her family. Gudlaug used her wealth to hire the best craftsmen. She used the stones to tell the world about her husband and her son, and she built a bridge, turning her private sorrow into a lasting contribution to the world her son had left behind. Number 2, a man carved, a shield to ward off bad luck. The year is 793. A man named Care is preparing for a journey. He is a farmer and a sailor from the coast of Norway. He and a group of men from his village are taking their ship, a new one, fast and sleek, across the sea to the west. They are going to trade, or maybe to raid. The line between the two is often thin. The sea is a dangerous place. Storms can appear without warning, and there are other dangers, the Draugr, the spirits of the drowned who try to pull sailors down to their death. The great sea serpent Jormungandr who encircles the world. Care believes in these things. He needs protection. He takes a round wooden shield made of linden wood. He does not paint it with a bright color or his personal emblem. Instead, he takes his knife and begins to carve. He carves a series of magical symbols, runes, and images into the face of the shield. He is not just decorating it, he is empowering it, he is turning it into a magical object. He carves the rune Algiz, the elk's edge, a powerful symbol of protection. He carves it multiple times around the edge of the shield. He carves the sun wheel, a symbol of good fortune and the power of the sun. In the center, he carves a complex, swirling design of 3 interlocking triangles, the Valknut, a symbol associated with Odin and the passage between life and death. This is not idle doodling. Each symbol has a purpose. Each cut into the wood is a spell. He might have chanted as he carved, calling on the gods for their favor. He might have smeared the runes with his own blood to give them life. You know, when he is finished, the shield is no longer just a piece of wood and iron. It is a focus of magical power. When he holds it, he feels more confident. It will not just deflect a sword or an axe. It will deflect bad luck. It will turn away the evil eye. It will help him navigate through the fog. This belief in the power of symbols was deep in their world. Objects were not just objects. A sword could have a name and a personality. A ship could have a spirit, and a shield could be a magical guardian. We do not know what happened to Care, but we have found shields like the one he might have made. The Gokstad ship burial from a century later contained a row of shields painted in yellow and black. While not carved with runes, they show the importance of the shield as a symbol. Fragments of other shields found in bogs and graves sometimes show traces of these kinds of markings. Care's world was not separated into the physical and the supernatural. They were intertwined. A storm was a physical event, but it was also the rage of a god, as a victory in battle was due to strength and skill, but also to luck and divine favor. By carving his shield, Care was doing something practical. He was preparing himself for all the dangers of his world, seen and unseen. Number 1, a man and a woman on a farm started it all. Before the ships, before the raids, before the sagas, there was a man and a woman on a farm. Let us call them Hakon and Liv. They lived around the year 750 on the west coast of Norway. Their world was small. It was the fjord, the mountains behind their farm, and the cluster of other farms within a day's walk. Their life was dictated by the seasons. In the spring, they plowed their small fields of barley and oats with a wooden ard pulled by an ox. They took their sheep and cattle up to the high summer pastures. In the summer, they fished for cod and herring in the fjord and gathered hay for the winter. In the autumn, they harvested their crops and slaughtered the animals they could not afford to feed until the spring. In the winter, they huddled in their longhouse, weaving cloth, mending tools, and telling stories. Their farm was their world. They knew every rock, every tree. Their family had lived there for generations. They were buried in the mounds on the hill overlooking the longhouse. Their ancestors were still part of the farm. They were the landvader, the spirits of the land. Hakon and Liv left them offerings of milk and grain to keep them happy. A happy farm was a productive farm. Their longhouse was a single large room. People and animals lived under the same roof, separated by a low wall. The smoke from the central fire filled the room before finding its way out through a hole in the roof. The smell was of wood smoke, animals, cooking food, and unwashed bodies. But something was changing. The population was growing. The good farmland along the coast was all taken. Hakon's eldest son would inherit the farm. But what about his other 2 sons? There was not enough land to divide. They could try to clear new land high up in the mountains. But that was hard, marginal land. At the same time, the craft of shipbuilding was improving. Men were building ships that were more seaworthy, faster, and stronger than ever before. These new ships could do more than just hug the coast. They could cross the open sea. One evening, a ship captain, a cousin of Liv's, visited their farm. He spoke of lands to the west, uninhabited islands with good pasture, and further south, rich lands with monasteries full of gold and silver, protected only by men who prayed. Hakon's younger sons listened. They looked at their small farm, at the mountains that hemmed them in. They heard the stories of the sea, of new lands, of wealth for the taking. The choice was between a life of hard labor on a small patch of poor land, or the risk and promise of the sea. The next spring, they made their choice. They joined the ship captain. They sailed west. They were not called Vikings yet, and they were just farmers' sons, looking for a better life. They were driven by a simple, powerful force, a shortage of land, and an abundance of ambition. Everything that came after the raids on Lindisfarne, the settlement of Iceland, the Varangian Guard, the Jellingstone started here. It started in a smoky longhouse on a fjord in Norway. It started with a family looking at their limited options on the land and then turning their eyes to the sea. The soul of the Vikings was not born in a king's hall. It was born on a farm.